Abby Glassenberg from Craft Industry Alliance. I hope you're having a fabulous day today. Today we are doing our member spotlight, which we always do on Wednesdays at 1:30 Eastern. And we're going to be dropping in on one of our members whose name is Lauren Rad today. And she has a beautiful knitting business called A Bee in the Bonnet. So I'm really excited to learn more about it, see maybe some samples from her studio, find out what motivates her and how she's built her. Lauren, I've just sent you a request, so hopefully you can come and join us momentarily. But hey, Lauren, how are
Hey,
you?
Abby, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit because I feel like I'm a little high up. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so welcome. I'm super excited to talk to you. Your knits are so beautiful,
Oh, thank
and
you.
you have almost like a romantic, I feel like, style to them.
Yes.
That's really beautiful and lovely to look at. And so I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about sort of your knitting history, like how you learned to knit and how this all kind of came to be.
Yeah. So for me, my knitting journey started in law school. I was 22. I was on the other side of the country. I was far away from everybody I knew, and I was super stressed out. In law school, the way grades work at most schools is that you have no homework all semester, you have no tests all semester, and your entire grade hinges on one exam at the very end of the semester, and that's it. So I was stressed. It was my very first semester, and I knew that I needed some way to cope with that stress in a healthier way. And I was at like a party or some sort of gathering of my classmates, and I mentioned, gosh, I wish I knew how to knit. That looks so relaxing. And my friend goes, well, I can teach you. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah, my grandma taught me. There's a yarn store just off campus. Let's go. We'll get together. So she took me to my first local yarn shop. It was Woolcott in Harvard Square. It's not there anymore, unfortunately,
Yeah.
as so many have disappeared. But it was wonderful. You know, they had the big shelves full of all sorts of yarn, and I bought 4 balls of the Rowan Big Wool and some US size 19 needles. And I was like, I'm going to make a scarf for my boyfriend. And it was terribly ugly. It was, lumpy and misshapen. And I didn't realize that you were supposed to weave in your ends after you joined a new ball. So I just snipped them, had these little tufts sticking out. And it's like 15 stitches wide at one end and 23 at the other. But he wore it and he loved it and he still has it and made him happy. And so that was kind of the start of it. I knit all through law school. I had a little knitting circle, and we would meet at the student center where there was a fireplace, and we would knit in between classes. And then I knit through studying for the bar exam, came back to California where I grew up, knit all through 8 years of practice. And then about 4 years ago, I transitioned. I left practicing law completely, moved to teaching law to high schoolers part-time, and started designing knitting patterns. So that's where I am now.
Wow, that's a great story. So really de-stress was the motivation for
Yes.
you. And I know that you describe the patterns that you create as being sort of unstressful patterns. They're easy to memorize. So what makes a knitting pattern easy to memorize or like unstressful to knit?
Yeah, so for me, I think there are a few key features. One is very little shaping. So I'm not a garment knitter for the most part. If I have to do neck shaping and shoulder shaping and waist shaping, I'm not going to make it. So generally, I prefer either flat things like shawls with very little shaping involved, or things with really straightforward shaping where I don't have to think that much, like socks. A sock mostly comes in one or two or maybe three shapes if you're really getting creative with your heels. But once you kind of get the hang of your basic sock recipe, you don't have to think that hard about it. And what I found with a lot of sock knitters is even though they'll buy my pattern, if they don't like the heel I put in or the toe they put in, they'll just use their own. And so I think that that's kind of a really neat feature of sock knitting in particular. So lack of shaping is one thing I look for. In terms of memorizability of a stitch pattern, I think generally relatively short is good. Or if it's not short, it's a mirror image. So you'll see sometimes in my patterns, there will be like an 8-stitch motif, and then there'll be a column of purl stitches, and then it'll be flipped and it'll be the same 8-stitch motif in reverse. And so you start getting into the rhythm of things kind of flowing back and forth together. So I like stitches generally that come in an 8 to 10 stitch motif, maybe 6, generally no more than that. And sometimes I'll make a motif by combining 3 to 5 stitch motifs, and I'll put two of them together. But generally, I think no more than 10 stitches makes it easier for most people to memorize. And then I also really like having a rest row in between. So I'll have an action row where you've got all the yarn overs and your decreases and your increases, and then I'll have a row of straight knits or a row of straight purls. And I find that helps people kind of relax in between the rows where they have to think a little bit more, and keeps it feeling engaging as well, because then you settle into that. Here's the work row, here's the rest row, here's the work row, here's the rest row, and you start kind of settling into that one more row rhythm. So those are kind of the three things that for me make a pattern easily memorized and easy to work on.
And what is it like teaching high school students about the law? Because
I
that's very
love it.
different than practicing law.
Yes. Honestly, I have more fun in my job now than I ever did as a practicing lawyer. High schoolers are at this really neat point in life where they are old enough that they can have hard conversations about things, and think about, how the world should be. And they're not so old that their ideas about how the world should be have calcified. So they're really open to thinking about new ideas and considering each other's perspectives. So we have a lot of really interesting conversations together, a lot of really fruitful conversations. It helps to, kind of set the expectation at the beginning of class that we give each other the benefit of the doubt. We believe that we are engaging with each other in good faith. We believe that there are not stupid questions in this class. It's okay to ask questions if you're confused about something, because the law is hard. And then we move from there. And so we have a lot of fun together. I love it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that even as adults understanding the law that can be confusing is that it's open for interpretation in a lot of ways. And we're really looking at precedent. And I think people, and I'm imagining as a mom of a high school student and one just about to go to college, that kids at that age, they sort of assume, like many adults actually do, that the law is black and white. There's this, and then there's, either you're in accordance with the law or you've broken the law. And
Yep.
in fact, law is built on history. And so it's that can be somewhat difficult to sort of wrap your head around.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that sometimes the ambiguity is intentional, because we can't foresee every possible situation that would arise. And so we have to write statutes in a way that will encompass things that we don't think about. And that sometimes means the statutes have to be a little bit vague, and then the courts have to interpret those statutes. Right. So some of my favorite refrains with the kids are, "It depends," and "I don't know yet." And
right.
Having that openness with them, being able to say, I am an adult who has spent a very long time thinking about these topics, and I still can't give you a straightforward answer to that because there isn't one. It helps build that trust too.
Right. And start to see that we're all part of building society together. So, which I think is so important. So I think that's great work as a former middle school teacher, middle school social studies teacher. I think that's very appealing.
You guys are heroes. The middle school teachers.
Yeah. I happen to like middle school students, but yes, understood. There's also a very difficult age. Yeah. And so you also do a really beautiful job, I have to say, on Instagram. You have a lot of followers on Instagram, and you have really beautiful photography, and seem to really get a lot of joy out of sort of setting up the flat lay photos and creating photography that is appealing to your audience. And for me, actually, that's something I've struggled with. I know a lot of our members and followers struggle with creating beautiful Instagram photos. That sort of isn't the priority, but for you, it's really artistic. So maybe you can share with us some of your favorite tips for creating really lovely Instagram photos of handmade.
Yeah. So for me, the photography part of it really draws on a lot of the same skills that I use in the knitting part of it. It's just expressed in a different way. So in the same way that when we're working on a knit project, we look at the proportion of different stitch motifs against each other, and we look at how the different color combinations work together, and we look at how arranging things in a particular way is pleasing to the eye or feels off kilter. All of those things are part of what goes into my photography progress as well. So I think about, does this cluster of things feel soothing, or does it feel off balance? Do I need to add another piece to that? Do I need to take a piece away from that? I think about my flat lays in particular as having layers, and then within those layers having zones. So oftentimes one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make when they're working on flat lays, and it's something that I did really early on too, is they just lay things out on a table. And they don't have any sort of positional relationship to each other, and there's nothing tying them together. They're just all sitting on a surface. And so my kind of first big thing that I learned about making a good flat lay is that a flat lay needs to have 3 layers. So you have your actual surface you're photographing on, you have some sort of intermediate layer, and that's where you'll often see me using like, lace doilies or paper ephemera, or sometimes I'll even use a cutting board. But it's something to give that kind of intermediate flat layer, and you can use that to tie together some of the other pieces of your flat lay. And then you start layering in sort of the more 3-dimensional decorative elements. And so that's, I'll put down the socks, and I'll add some roses, and I'll add a teacup. And I cluster those things together, and I try to position them so that they have some physical contact with that second layer. And then the second layer helps them all feel like they're connected to each other somehow.
That's great advice. So
yeah,
good.
That helps a lot. I also took an online webinar years ago with someone who was really good at flat lays, and she said, I think about the directional flow of my flat lay.
Okay.
So for example, if you are arranging things on a diagonal, say you're going from the bottom left to the upper right, don't then put a spoon in the middle of the flat lay that's going straight across. Arrange the spoon so that it's also diagonal and flowing along that diagonal line. Or if you are arranging things in kind of a radiating circle going out from the middle of your flat lay, you don't want to have things that are kind of cutting across the corners of that radiating circle. And so oftentimes I think when people are arranging flat lays, they think about putting things down in the position where they would use an item.
Right.
So for example, like when I'm setting a teaspoon on the saucer of my teacup, I'll usually put it behind the teacup when I'm using it, because I don't want the spoon in my way when I'm trying to drink. But that doesn't make for an engaging photograph. You want the spoon in the front so you can see the whole thing. And then you position that at the angle where it works with the composition of the photo, as opposed to positioning it at the angle that would work where if you were actually drinking from the cup. And so I think that requires kind of a shift in spatial thinking when taking photographs. So those are kind of my 2 biggest things: is think about your layers of your flat lay, and then think about the directional flow of your flat lay. And one more thing, the eye loves odd numbers. So I like to arrange things in clusters of 3 or 5 generally. So I'll put, like, even if I have 2 clusters of roses, there will be 5 clusters, 5 roses in each cluster, or 3 roses in each cluster. And then there will be kind of the knit thing in the middle. And so there will still be kind of 3 main parts of the picture. For whatever reason, we really like that odd number. So
yeah, that's great. It's really almost the way you're describing it, like composing a painting. When you think about the composition of a canvas, it's really a very similar setup where you're placing things not because of practicality or randomly, but really so that there's your eyes flowing and really thinking about directionality and sort of what makes the eye do what you want the eye to do. So
yeah, there's a lot of the same principles work with it, because you're still working within this, this rectangular frame.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Those are really, really practical tips. I'm so glad I asked, because that was great.
Yeah.
So for folks who do want to come over to Ravelry and check you out, or to your website, how should we find you, and what can we expect to find?
So I am a bee in the bonnet in most of the places. I'm a bee in the bonnet on Ravelry, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Pinterest, and my website is abeeinthebonnet.com. Nice. On Twitter, I am bees in the bonnet, because somebody else snagged a bee in the bonnet back in 2009. Blast. So we work with what we have. In all of those places, you'll of course find updates on my patterns. On my website, I tend to also blog about knitting tips and tricks and techniques. So I talk a lot about sock construction. I talk about, what makes a good pattern, how to write a good pattern, how to grade a pattern. I've seen a lot of patterns lately where there'll be like a sock, and they'll say, in order to make a bigger size up 1 needle. And that makes me want to rip my hair out. Don't just size up 1 needle. You have to grade it. Otherwise, you're gonna change the quality of the fabric, and it's not going to be suited for its purpose. So you'll see me talking about that a lot over there, talking about knitting photography. I've got a whole series of blog posts about knitting photography.
Nice.
And I'm actually going to be doing a series of online workshops starting this fall, focusing on craft photography. So there will be one on, kind of simple, quick tricks to improve craft photography all around. I'll have one focusing on flat lays in particular.
Yay!
Had a lot of requests on doing one about taking photographs in difficult lighting circumstances. So we'll focus on a few of those this fall.
Oh, that sounds great.
Those can keep an eye on Instagram and keep an eye on the blog, and I will post about those when those are ready.
Oh, definitely. That sounds really, really good and something
that'll
a
be
lot of people would love. So thank you for offering those. And thank you for being a Craft Industry Alliance member too. We appreciate having you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great resource. I didn't know it was a thing until earlier this year, when my friend Julie Robinson said, "Hey, if you're interested, you should really join this group."
Oh, that was nice of her.
Yeah, she's great. So I like the monthly roundtables. I like the Facebook.
Good.
I'm quiet, but I'm observing and absorbing.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for this chat today. This was really fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
Speak for our spotlight next week. Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.